Through 97.5 and 1280, the KSL Sports Zone NBA Draft Lottery Show. I'm Ben Anderson. He is Chandler Holt. A very happy Sunday and a very happy Mother's Day to everybody out there. We are getting you ready for the NBA Draft Lottery, which is beginning momentarily. That doesn't mean the actual lottery itself is beginning momentarily. In fact, the lottery has already occurred, but the names have not yet been revealed.
Yes, for the local and national media. I think it happened around an hour ago. And, of course, they sort of bring all the representatives in and then sort of reveal one at a time. We'll go in reverse order, starting at 14. And then as the names sort of come off, you'll know where the Jazz are, depending who you see and who you don't see.
So a quick update for those who have not been tracking the Utah Jazz all year. The Jazz have the fourth best odds to win the lottery, remain in the top four, get the number one overall pick overall. Now, technically, they're tied for the second best odds.
Yes.
Because Washington, Indiana, and Brooklyn all have the best odds of winning the number one pick at 14%. The Jazz and the Sacramento Kings are tied at 11.5%, and it's about a 45% chance to remain in the top four. And that top four number is going to be a big one for the Jazz because this is a draft with four guys at the top that I think are in one tier. And then everybody else 5 on is probably in another tier. Now, things can change. We remember the lottery last year when the Jazz slipped to 5. I don't think anybody thought Ace Bailey was going to be on the board when they picked. Lo and behold, that's what happened. So if the Jazz end up at 5, I think there's a slim chance that one of these guys projected in the top 4 could certainly be there. But I would not be betting on it. I would not be waiting for it. And a lot of the people I've talked to closely, some people within the NBA, some draft people, have really said that there's really a top 4, and that's kind of a class onto its own. And then beyond that, 5, 6, 7, 8 plus is another group.
Yeah, and of course that 4 being BYU's AJ DeBonsa, Kansas guard Darren Peterson, North Carolina's Caleb Wilson, and Duke's Cam Boozer. Honestly, there's been movement for all those. As of right now, it seems like AJ DeBonsa is the projected number 1 pick, almost regardless of who earns that slot. And then 2 through 4 is basically a mix-up of teams where they think they might go. Some people think Cam Boozer could be the 4th pick.
Yep.
If Indiana gets second, a lot of people think he would be the favorite for the Pacers.
And he could go number 1 overall.
Yes.
We still don't know. The NBA draft combine begins officially today, but really tomorrow they get on the court, and everybody's going to have their opportunity to go through the workouts, some of them playing 5-on-5. To try and increase and improve their stock. So we will keep you covered throughout the next hour, I think at the very least, on what's happening with the Utah Jazz and the NBA Draft Lottery. Again, they own the 4th best odds, and they can draft as high as 1. And then maybe most importantly, and where Jazz fans can feel like they've already won the lottery some, they can fall no further than 8. And had they lost a coin toss with the Sacramento Kings, because the two teams finished with the same record at the end of the regular season, the Jazz could have conceivably dropped to 9. There's a 0.6% chance of that happening. And had the Jazz fallen to 9, that pick would have gone to the Oklahoma City Thunder, which would have truly been worst-case scenario. So in a sense, I don't want to say the Jazz are playing with house money. You want to win this lottery. You want to get the best player available. But you know you're getting a top 8 selection in this draft, which will be the second highest pick they've had at worst since beginning this rebuild 4 years ago. They drafted Cody Williams at 10 overall. They drafted Taylor Hendricks at 9 overall, and then, of course, they drafted Ace Bailey last year at 5. So the Jazz, knowing they're going to have a top 8 pick, will be somewhere in the range above both Cody Williams and Taylor Hendricks, all the way up to the number 1 overall pick. So that's where the Jazz, I think, can feel some comfort that they have a very valuable asset coming to the team.
I think you're right in both senses that, of course, you want the best player available, but also you are playing with house money because the Jazz also made that big trade for Jaren Jackson Jr., so they are hoping to be a playoff team next year. So no matter who you add, it's just sort of adding money to the pot, if you will, going into next year, hoping to be a playoff team. And maybe first-year contributor, maybe a couple years, can sort of grow alongside Ace Bailey, and then the smoke is sort of clearing for the Utah Jazz.
And the good news for the Jazz, if you're following, well, we are talking about there being kind of a legit top 4, and then I think the group drops off after that, and it's very guard-heavy, mostly point guard, some combo guard stuff, but everybody 5, 6, 7, 8, or 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, depending on who you're talking about, I think truly has all-star upside. This is a very good draft.
Yes.
This is a draft where the guy you're taking at 5, 6, 7, or 8, if the Jazz were to slip, I still think has a very realistic pathway to being a major, major contributor on a very good team and a long-term future starter. Now, those names would be Keaton Wagler, Kingston Flemings, Darius Acuff, Braden Burries. Who am I missing?
Michael Brown
Brown Jr., who He's kind of dealt with some back injuries throughout the year, but certainly has some enormous potential. So, again, a very good draft here coming up for the Utah Jazz, regardless of where they land. And a little bit awkward because the Jazz, as you mentioned, after trading for Jaren Jackson Jr., are assuming that Walker Kessler comes back, not that there's really a center that's being talked about anywhere on these top 8 picks. The Jazz are pretty stacked, in all honesty. I think the Jazz's starting lineup is pretty close to set next year, so whoever you're drafting is a guy who's going to probably come off your bench and is going to have to earn a starting spot. Now, that's certainly possible, but the Jazz have so much value and talent, I think, already in their starting 5 that if they were to have to replace somebody, a person probably gets traded. Mm-hmm. And I don't mean this summer, but I mean in the future. But there's not quite an ideal, perfect fit for the Jazz, I think, in this draft. And you could say, well, Cam Boozer's a front court player, and he's a 4, and he comes in behind both Jaren Jackson Jr. and Lauri Markkanen. It's like, yeah, but if you draft a point guard, he's probably coming in behind Keontae George or Ace Bailey if it's a shooting guard. So, yeah, the Jazz have plenty of depth already. This player comes in, and in some ways, I think it just gives you the freedom to truly take the best player available.
Yeah, absolutely. Even though the fit might be kind of wonky, you absolutely just go for best player available and then figure it out later because, and we've said this a lot, too much talent is not a bad problem to have.
No.
And I think the Jazz front office has proven to be competent enough to work with it and sort of go down, take the right steps and like figure out how it will work best, not just now, but also in 3 years. Because, of course, you have your core sort of, if you want to, with, of course, pending a Walker Kessler extension, Lauri and Jaren Jackson. You have these guys set up through like 2029. And of course, you're adding a young guy. His contract would be up, I think, the year after that with this draft. So just a lot of options for the Jazz. And I agree, no matter what position, no matter how the fit is, you make it work.
Ideally for the Utah Jazz, truthfully, they are not back here drafting at the top of the lottery for a couple of years at the very earliest. And the earliest would be as if they're using somebody else's pick.
Yes.
That would be either the Cleveland or the Minnesota pick. I believe it's 2 years from now they would get one of those back. Or maybe it's even 3 years from now, but they have a swap in 2 years with Cleveland that I think you would ideally get if that's where Cleveland were to fall off. But yeah, this is, as the Jazz are beginning to exit this rebuild fully, this is the last time the Jazz are probably going to have a top 8 pick for a while. So you do want to make the most of this. And honestly, you look at how they've kind of set themselves up to exit this rebuild. It's not because they've hit on top 10 picks.
No.
I don't think you would count Taylor Hendricks as a hit by any means. He's already been traded off the team. Cody Williams is fighting for a rotation spot, but is not a franchise-changing player. The player you've drafted so far that has been quote-unquote franchise-changing is the same man who's going to be representing the Jazz at the lottery today, and that is Keontae George, and he was drafted 16 overall? 15 over?
Yeah.
16? So he was outside of the lottery.
Yes.
And he's become the best player of the group of players the Jazz have drafted so far. I think Ace Bailey has a chance to earn that title, but right now it's certainly Keontae George.
Yeah, and like you mentioned, it hasn't been no lottery luck for the Jazz. As of right now, of course, we will see what happens in the next 20, 30 minutes, but the Jazz have never moved up in the lottery. They moved up one time, but it was not with their own pick. I think that was with Brooklyn pick, and was that 2011? And then, yeah, never moved up in the lottery. I think in both of the last 2 years, they've moved down, and I think other than that, it's a lot of just staying where they are in the lottery standings.
Yeah, 2 years ago, the Jazz dropped from 9 to 10 or 8 to 10 because Atlanta jumped up and drafted Zachary Rieseshay number 1 overall. And then last year, the Jazz had the worst record in the NBA and fell all the way to 5th, which was the worst case scenario. So, yeah, there are certainly never seen any draft luck for Jazz fans. Yep. So I think the Jazz are probably prepared for that and recognize that that's a likely outcome. It has consistently been a likely outcome, despite the fact that if you're listening to this show, you've probably played either the Tankathon or Fanspo or ESPN Draft Simulator hundreds of times until the Jazz get a high pick. You only get one spin at this, unfortunately, when it comes to real life.
Yeah, and that's the thing that is really interesting about the lottery is you can sit there and sort of spin the lottery thing hundreds of times, and you'll see the averages sort of come back down to where they would be if you look at the odds. But it's only one spin. So even though the Hornets only have 5 combinations that earn them the number 1 pick, the one spin that the NBA does could be that spin.
All right, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, they will begin to introduce everyone representing the teams at the lottery and then reveal the order. We'll talk a little bit more of what you should be watching for. Coming up next, stick around. More NBA Draft Lottery coverage, 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone. It's the NBA Draft Lottery Show. Ben Anderson, Chandler Holt, 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone. We are about to get underway with the reveal of the lottery results. The broadcast is live right now on ABC. And they will be introducing, I suspect, the representatives for each team and then start going through this lottery. If you are a Jazz fan, here's what you're looking for, and here's where you'll know things are breaking well or things are breaking poorly. Really, the best case scenario is everything goes chalk.
Yes.
Now, that was the case last year, really to an extreme, because the Jazz had the worst record and you wanted them to finish number 1 overall. This is really about 14, 13, 12, 11, 10 going in order. You don't want any of those teams jumping up. So that would look like Charlotte at 14, Miami at 13, the Clippers, though this pick is going to Oklahoma City, at 12, Golden State at 11, and Milwaukee at 10. If that happens, that's a good sign for the Jazz already, obviously. Chicago comes in at 9. Dallas comes in at 8. You do not want to see the Jazz at number 8. That means the Jazz have fallen the max level down. But again, the good news is they're still holding on to their pick one way or another. Then, if it's chalk, or regardless of what happens, the most important thing for the Jazz is you want to see the Brooklyn Nets or the Indiana Pacers name announced before the Jazz.
Yes.
If that happens, you know the Jazz have jumped into the top 4.
Yep.
And that would come at either 7 or number 6 overall. Those are the lowest that those two teams could pick. Potentially even 5 with the Washington Wizards. But we do know that if you see the Brooklyn Nets before the Jazz or the Pacers before the Jazz will be drafting in the top 4.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right by pointing out the first 5 is what you really want to see chalk. Because if one of those bottom 5 teams jump up, then the odds for the Jazz landing in the top 4 jumps down a bunch.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah, but chalk all the way would be a good thing because as a bottom 4 team, if you go chalk up until 5th, then it's basically just however the odds shook out in the top 4 picks, and then the Jazz could be anywhere 1 through 4.
Which really rarely happens, and in fact, we've seen a lot of chaos in the last few years. Dallas obviously moving up from what was double digits, or 9, 10, 11, 12, whatever it was, to jump up to the number 1 overall pick. The year before that, it was the Atlanta Hawks. So right now on the broadcast, they are going through the representatives for each team. There's Keontae George for the Utah Jazz, choosing to step in and represent the team there. I think it's a good sign. Keontae is obviously a major piece of this Jazz organization. Is going to be going forward and being willing to take place and be the face of this, which is not always a fun event because often you're the face of disappointment.
Yes.
Is a good sign.
Yeah, I think you tweeted out like Keontae's buying in, and I think this is another sign of that, and I think that's absolutely right. I think it's 3 of the last 4 years a current or former Jazzman has represented the team in the lottery. I think 3 years ago was Colin Sexton, 2 years ago was Daryl Bailey.
They are bringing out the results now. Mark Davis will be reading them, and again, you want to see these picks go in order, so we will update them. We'll actually be playing it live here for you, and you're hoping for chalk. You hope you don't hear the Jazz's name at 8 or 7. Really 6 or 5 either. That means the Jazz are in the top 4. But they've never moved up in the lottery, as you've said. They owned the Brooklyn Nets pick one time and moved up to 3, but never had any real significant luck. The highest they've ever drafted is number 2 overall when they took Darrell Griffith in the early 80s.
The 14th pick in the 2026 NBA draft goes to the Charlotte Hornets.
So far, so good.
Yes.
The 13th pick will be made by the Miami Heat.
That's in order.
Yep.
This should be the Oklahoma City Thunder. You hope if you're a fan.
In the NBA draft will be the Oklahoma City Thunder.
That's good news for everybody not to have OKC jump into the top 4 in this year's draft.
Paul George trade in 2019.
This should be the Warriors.
The 11th pick belongs to the Golden State Warriors.
So far, so good for the Utah Jazz.
Yeah, first 4.
Pick number 10 will be made by the Milwaukee Bucks.
So far, so good. That pick will go to Atlanta if it went into the top 4.
The 9th pick in the NBA draft belongs to the Dallas Mavericks.
So that means that Chicago
Chicago.
has jumped into the
Wow,
top
Chicago
4.
into the top 4.
Okay, conceivably, you could hear the Jazz's name here. This is where the Jazz come on the board.
The 8th pick goes to the Atlanta Hawks.
Good sign for the Utah Jazz.
Yes.
They received this pick from New Orleans
Jazz are
due to
almost
the
at about a
Derrick Rose trade last
50-50
year.
chance now of getting a top 4 pick. You're hoping for the Brooklyn Nets here if you're a Jazz
Pick
fan.
number 7 will be made by the Sacramento Kings.
Grizzlies have jumped up.
Wow.
That means that Memphis has
So very
also
likely
jumped
this is the
into
Jazz
top
now
Yes.
coming in at number 6. About a 55% chance the Jazz will be here.
Picking 6th is
Whoa, the Utah Jazz have moved into the top 4 of the NBA
Wow.
draft.
is going to be in the top 4.
So if this is Indiana, they lose their pick
pick in the
to
NBA
the Los
draft
Angeles
will be
Clippers.
made by the the LA Clippers.
That's from the Pacers. The
Wow.
Pacers lose their
This
top
pick
5
from
pick.
The Pacers because of the Ivica Zubats trade
Wow.
in February.
Okay, so here are the 4 teams
Which
remaining.
means
The Chicago Bulls, the Memphis Grizzlies, the Utah Jazz, and the Washington Wizards. This is going to be the highest pick the Utah Jazz have had so far in the lottery. And by the way, we said this is a top 4 draft. You're looking at a very, very serious player come to the Utah Jazz.
Yeah, worst case scenario, you land at 4, and you're still looking at, I would say, most likely either Cam Boozer or Caleb Wilson. Both of those guys, not only are they the top pick, but you could argue the most important individual prospect or draft prospect on the Jazz. Of course, you had Ace Bailey at 5 last year.
Yeah, no, these players are all expected to be probably better than Ace Bailey.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's the level of prospect you're looking at, maybe right on par with, but this is a huge day already for the Utah Jazz. This is what they tanked the season for. This is what they put it all out there. So to see Brooklyn's name pop up, Jazz fans should be extraordinarily excited about what's going on right now. Do we want to take a break? No, we'll stay here. We'll stay here. So here's the order we have so far. And I may have gotten lost here. Let me see. I know this was the Pacers. So here's how the draft lottery has broken so far. Hornets are going 14, Heat at 13, Thunder at 12, Warriors at 11, Bucks at 10, Mavericks at 9, Hawks at 8, Kings at 7. This was the big one. The Brooklyn Nets come in at number 6. The Jazz had a 55% chance of going there, and Brooklyn jumps them and gets up at number 6, so the Jazz will be in the top 4. The Clippers get the pick from Indiana. That's a little bit of a blessing and a curse. I mean, obviously, that means there's another very solid piece coming out to join Kawhi Leonard and Darius Garland with the Los Angeles Clippers. A very savvy move on their part, and man, Indiana's got to be hurting now.
Yeah, they bet in the Ivica Zubats trade, basically put all their chips on the table, betting that they would land in the top 4. And honestly, I see why they did it. You were in the finals last year. Of course, this year was kind of a gap year, if you will, with Tyrese Halliburton's injury. And sort of breaks good for LA, breaks bad for the Indiana Pacers. Clippers at 5, and then Nets at 6. That was the big one. I think if we were doing the ESPN Analytics live draft lottery alongside it, and I think it was like a 56% chance that the Jazz's card was pulled there, but it ends up being the Nets. Maverick, and then the first 5, or was it the first 6, went completely chalk, and I think that was sort of building the suspense in a good way for the Utah Jazz. And I think seeing the Thunder at 12 and the Mavericks at 9, sort of the entire NBA gave a deep sigh.
The Chicago Bulls were the first team to jump up. Yeah, they were out of order. They had the 9th best odds, and they jumped up into the top 4. So the Mavericks actually slid a spot. I know there was a lot of fear from Jazz fans that it was going to be Golden State, or the Warriors, or the Mavericks jumping up into the top 4. Now, the Mavericks are obviously much further than those other teams, but this is pretty painful for Dallas because they don't own draft picks going forward. They've traded all of them when they were trying to build around Luka Doncic. So they really needed like another all-star bet to get a guy to come up and join Cooper Flagg. Now, they're still in very good shape because they have the guy in Cooper Flagg, but they would have loved another top 4 pick. Again, if you're just joining us right now, the Utah Jazz have moved into the top 4. Defied the odds and are at least not falling down the draft. There's a chance they haven't moved up because, again, they had the 4th best odds of, or they had the 4th worst record in the NBA and were projected to be in the top 4, but they did not slip, and that's what's most important, especially in a year where the top 4 guys are expected to be the big names. Again, a reminder: those are BYU's freshman AJ DeBonsa, Duke freshman Cam Boozer, Kansas freshman Darren Peterson, and North Carolina freshman Caleb Wilson. What separates these 4 guys, maybe with the exception of Darren Peterson, but even Darren Peterson, is the elite size that they have.
Yes.
Cam Boozer has very good size. He's 6'9", 250 pounds already. He looks like an NBA player today. And obviously, is the son of former Jazz man Carlos Boozer.
Tree trunks for legs, too. Like that, he is a big ground bound, which is sort of a knock against him, but he is just like, I think he's probably the most NBA ready. Like, he'll come in and he'll be an instant contributor. So even if you fall to 3 or 4 and that's the pick, I think Jazz fans should be happy because, like I mentioned earlier, you're moving into playoff contention. So I think adding a guy like that would be a lot of help.
But a big-time true power forward. Caleb Wilson, also a forward, might be able to play a little bit of the 3, might end up being a little bit bigger depending on how his body develops. Right now, not really a 3-point shooting threat, but the best athlete in the draft. I think certainly in the conversation for the best athlete in the draft and has absolutely elite size on top of it. 6'9" with a projected 7-foot wingspan. Darren Peterson was very heavily considered the number 1 overall pick before the season. He had a bizarre one at Kansas. He does lack great size. He's probably 6'4", 6'5", in that range, but might be the best shooter in the draft. He is a true difficult shot maker.
Oh, yeah.
He makes some crazy shots. Had one of the best offensive seasons we've ever seen, despite the fact that he was dealing with full body cramps, which he attributed to overuse of creatine. So let's go back out to the draft lottery. Mark Davis is about to announce the top 4 picks.
Thanks again, Malika. The 4th pick in the NBA draft goes to the Chicago Bulls.
Top 3 for the Utah Jazz.
Wow.
The 3rd pick will be made by the Memphis
Wow, top 2 for the Utah Jazz.
Picking 2nd will be the Utah Jazz.
The number 2 overall
That
pick
means that
goes to the
number 1
Utah
pick
Jazz.
in the 2026 NBA draft goes to the Washington Wizards.
The Wizards get the number 1 overall pick.
Wizards.
So they're going to have their choice. And, man, I'm going to tell you, I have no idea what direction they're going to go.
Yeah.
They need help everywhere. This is not a team that I think
Trade last season. They added Anthony.
this is not a team that has any kind of obvious strength yet, so they should just take best player available, as should everybody. But the Jazz sitting at number 2, I mean, you are guaranteed one of Darren Peterson, A.J. DeBonsa, Cam Boozer, or Caleb Wilson, and really you're going to get your pick of the choice. Showing A.J. DeBonsa on TV right now, he doesn't look thrilled, but he may not be the number 1 overall pick. There's a very realistic shot they could go for any one of these players, Darren Peterson, Cam Boozer. I don't think Caleb Wilson is going to be a likely pick at number 1 overall, but crazy. This is going to be tied for the second or for the highest pick the Utah Jazz have ever had since they drafted Darrell Griffith in the early 80s.
Tied for the highest, and also for the first time in franchise history, the monkey is off the back. The Jazz have climbed in the NBA draft lottery for the first time ever with their own pick.
Pretty wild. Washington Wizards. That's good if you're a Jazz fan. You do want talent going west or east, I should say. You want the number 1 overall pick going to the opposite side of the NBA. So the number 1 overall pick going to Washington is very good news for the Jazz. But yes, it was revealed. Sorry, was it Memphis 4 or was it the Bulls 4? Chicago was 4.
Yes.
Grizzlies end up 3, Jazz 2, Wizards 1. Funny, that was actually the order those 4 teams were in the draft, so that actually did end up going chalk for the most likely outcomes once these 2 teams were in the top 4. So again, if you're just joining in, the Utah Jazz have won the number 2 overall draft pick in this year's NBA draft. And they are going to have their pick of the litter of what is going to be the most talented player to join this roster.
Yeah,
I mean, I just
absolutely.
think it's that simple. I'm not sure you really have to overthink this. The Jazz have a ton of power, a ton of leverage now, as do the Washington Wizards. We will see. You know, the Wizards went out and traded for Trae Young and Anthony Davis this year midseason. Similarly, the Jazz went out and got Jaren Jackson Jr. So a ton of intrigue here for both of these teams, adding top talent. And again, I don't think there's a clear-cut number 1. I think A.J. DeBonsa might be the odds-on favorite right now to go 1 overall, but I would say, you know, if you're separating these 4 players out into, you know, the top 4 picks and trying to put the percentages on it, I might say it's like 31% AJ, 30% Boozer, maybe 29% Darren Peterson, and the last 10% would be Caleb Wilson. I don't really see him going number 1 overall just because I think his game still has quite a ways to develop. But the Utah Jazz sitting at number 2 are just in an unreal spot to add a major piece of talent to this roster.
I mean, I think right now odds would be that A.J. DeBonsa would be number 1, and I think if I were the Jazz at number 2, A.J. is off the board. I think my pick, of course, this means nothing, but I think it would be Darren Peterson.
And I think it'd probably be Cam Boozer.
Okay.
If I'm being honest with you. So that, I mean, I think there's going to be a real difference of opinion here in what happens. But honestly, do not be at all surprised if teams fall in love with Cam Boozer.
Yes.
He is ready to go day 1. He's going to step on. He's won every level of his life. He's been the best player on the floor every time he stepped on the floor, probably every time he's played, except for when he's playing against his father. But he has always been the best player on the floor. So very, very exciting news if you're a Utah Jazz fan. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, more on the other side as the Utah Jazz have won the number 2 overall pick in the 2026 NBA draft. It's your 97.5 and KSL Sports Zone NBA Draft Lottery Show, and the Utah Jazz have moved up to the number 2 overall pick. The draft order will be the Washington Wizards, number 1 overall. Jazz sitting at number 2. Memphis Grizzlies at 3. The Chicago Bulls at 4. The big losers of the draft, the Indiana Pacers, they fall out of the top 5. Their pick goes to 5, which means it belongs to the Los Angeles Clippers. Brooklyn Nets at 6. Sacramento Kings at 7. Atlanta Hawks at 8. Dallas Mavericks at 9. And the Milwaukee Bucks at 10. I'm Ben Anderson. He's Chandler Holt, as we are walking you through what just happened for the Utah Jazz. Quickly looking at the back end of the lottery and how this unfolded in the Jazz's favor. It was chalk through the first 5 picks: Hornets, Heat, Thunder, Warriors, Bucks. And then it was revealed that the Chicago Bulls had jumped up from number 9 into the top 4. That was not a great sign for the Jazz. Then it goes Mavericks, Hawks, and then the Bucks jumped up, and that was, the Grizzlies jumped up, and that was a really bad sign for the Jazz because once two teams below the Jazz had leaped into the top four, the Jazz had less than a 50% chance of keeping that pick. In fact, it was about a 56% chance that they were going to be drafting 6th overall, which I think would have represented a pretty serious slide. I know it's only 2 spots, but that's what has always happened to the Utah Jazz. But then instead of popping up at 6 after the Kings' name was revealed, it was the Brooklyn Nets who showed up on the board, meaning the Jazz had jumped into the top 4. Then, as we mentioned, it goes Clippers 5, Bulls 4, Grizzlies 3, the Utah Jazz coming at number 2, and the Wizards at number 1. Look, you would always rather have the number 1 overall pick than the number 2 overall pick, but this is not Wemby to Brandon Miller. There's not a clear-cut number 1 in this draft. This is not Cooper Flagg to who was the number 2 overall pick last year?
Dylan Harper.
Dylan Harper is not even that much of a drop. Yeah. There is going to be a bunch of different opinions. I think there are going to be teams that have Darren Peterson number 1. There are going to be teams that have A.J. Debonsa number 1. There are going to be teams that have Cam Boozer number 1. Now, of course, it only matters what the Washington Wizards think. If you look at their roster, they've got Trae Young, who's an offensive wizard. They've got a very good defensive big man in Anthony Davis, who does prefer to play the 4. They do have Alex Sarr already, who is a number 2 overall pick himself. That may mean that they don't want to draft a front court guy. You've got Anthony Davis and you've got Alex Sarr. That does seem to think that either Darren Peterson or A.J. Debonsa would make a ton of sense there, and which could mean that the Utah Jazz are sitting there with the 2nd overall pick with a Cam Boozer on the board for you. And again, I will tell you, Cam Boozer has been the best player every step of the way, and he's a little old school. He's different than your traditional lottery pick right now. He's a little bit more ground-bound, but, man, absolutely an enormous option for the Jazz. And as we said before the break, this player coming in, I think, is expected to be the best player on the team in the next 3 or 4 years. Yeah. That surpasses Lowry. That surpasses Ace Bailey. That surpasses Keontae George. That surpasses Jaren Jackson Jr., and that tells you really how important this is. I mean, the Jazz are in a spot where they could conceivably open up a championship window if they hit on this pick, and they are in a prime position to be able to get a major, major player.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you're absolutely right. And I think even some offseason moves could sort of sway how the Wizards look at this number 1 overall selection. I'm not putting anything out there, but there have been talks about Anthony Davis and his wanting to be in Washington after getting traded from Dallas there earlier in the season. Maybe if something does happen with him, they look at Cam Boozer because, like you said, he has been the best college basketball player. And then even then, maybe they want to put Darren Peterson, a bigger guy who projects to be at least an active defender next to Trae Young, another shot maker. I wouldn't just put it in stone right now that AJ is going to go number 1. I think I do think you're looking at one of the 3 at the number 2 overall pick for the Jazz between A.J. Debonsa, Cam Boozer, Darren Peterson.
So welcome in the 3rd member of our Jazz Notes podcast. Speaking of which, Chandler and I will be recording a Jazz Notes podcast after this, breaking down a little bit more where the Utah Jazz landed in the lottery. So if you're looking for more content after this show ends, you can find it on wherever you get your podcast. But he is the host of DJ and PK in the mornings. It is David James. What's going on, DJ?
Well, Austin Ames is sitting there plotting and planning. Man, he has so many options. I wonder what he wants to do. Does he want to sit at 2? Who does he want? If he really wants that player, does he want to move up to 1? Or if he can't get AJ, who's his presumptive number 1, would he be dropping back to 3 and 4 because that's where the player he really wants? I'm very intrigued. Very intrigued. If they'd done the number 1 pick, it would have been a slam dunk. We all know they would have taken Debonsa. They never would have traded, I don't think. And I think that would have been it. But now at 2, I'm very intrigued.
Yeah, DJ, what do you think there's some relief that they're not at number 1 and have to take a certain player? Now, maybe they would have just loved taking AJ, but we know the pressures of drafting the local guy is very difficult on teams, and sometimes it leads to bad decisions. The Phoenix Suns took DeAndre Ayton over, Luka Doncic. Now, Luka fell to 4 in that draft, or 5 in that draft. But, yeah, overall, sometimes having the local guy at the top of the draft leads you to having some different pressures that's who you have to pick.
Well, first off, that is a real thing. And the local example is that when Kevin O'Connor was running the show for Utah, he did not want to draft Jimmer Fredette. And the way the draft broke, he didn't have to, but he also didn't have to explain to everybody why he didn't draft Jimmer Fredette. So, yes, that's a real thing. And I think that's often the case, but I don't know this, but I suspect it would have made an exception for A.J. Debonsa and they would have picked it.
DJ, the Jazz made the big trade for Jaren Jackson. They're adding now a number 2 overall pick, the highest pick on this current core, as they attempt to be a postseason team next year. Do you expect to be any growing pains with a young player on a playoff team?
We may have lost DJ.
I'm back now. I did lose that question. It dropped out. I went through a dead zone, but I'm good now.
Oh, I was just
Sorry
asking, adding a number 2 overall pick, the highest pick on the Jazz's young core, to a prospective playoff team, how do you expect sort of a rookie fitting in as the Jazz look to compete next year?
Well, it probably depends on which rookie they take, but I think when you're drafting 2, you can get a little bit of help. I think obviously this person will play. I would really caution against assuming that they're going to win games and be a difference maker. That's a very big ask for a rookie. I think you can go in, you can play minutes, and you can help. I don't think you can be expected to vault the franchise forward. And I don't know that, depending on who they draft and what position they play, there might be some expectations they would start. To me, closing is the biggest ask, so I would expect they don't do that. There is a world in which starting is the best thing because those are the least pressurized minutes in a game. And Jerry Sloan over the years started rookies multiple times for that reason. They were the easiest minutes. He might only be playing somebody 15 minutes a game, but he'd start them and play them the first 6 minutes because that was the least intense part of the game. So I would keep my expectations low as far as this person moving the needle immediately. I would have expectations they play, but I wouldn't expect them to have a massive impact on winning and losing.
Do you think at all about position, DJ? I mean, the Jazz have a starting 5 next year. I think they know what they have, but do you start thinking about that at all if you're weighing between a bigger guy or a smaller guy?
Just long enough to know I'm not doing it. That's all I think about it. I would not do that. And I think there's multiple reasons for that. One, there's a lot of examples in NBA history of teams that draft for need and they make a mistake. There aren't as many recent examples because teams largely no longer do that. And there are probably exceptions out there. But I think there were some hard lessons learned when I was just starting out in the media, and everybody's learned from them. And so you don't do that. Don't draft for need. And teams turn over contracts are so short, you're drafting this rookie, you're going to be able to hold on to him. Even players like Hayward and Mitchell left the Jazz, you got them for 7 years. So you need to draft the best player because the rest of your roster is going to turn over, and what is a need now may not be a need later. And what you have a lot of now, you may really need later. So just go get the best player. And I also think the place where the Jazz have the biggest log jam right now is probably the 4, although maybe arguably it's the 3. But if you got someone else there, I'd play them there. The guys are playing 60 games, give or take, 60, 65 games. And you're playing 30 minutes a game. There's plenty of minutes. And it's positionless basketball. I mean, Jackson is clearly a 4, not a 5. But you're telling me you can't play 10 minutes against backup 5s? Yeah, you can. Most nights you can. I think so. So now all of a sudden, even if he's playing 33 minutes, let's say, now he's only got 23 minutes at the 4. You need 25 more minutes at the 4. And maybe that's Lowry, but maybe he's at the 3. And if Lowry plays 25 minutes at the 4, he's only playing 10 at the 3, and there's more time there. So I think with positionless basketball, you can find space and time for guys if they're good players. Plus, people are playing 82 games, and that's going to create more space. So just go get the best player. That's it. I don't worry about the position.
Catch the rest of DJ's coverage tomorrow morning on DJ and PK from 6 to 10 right here on 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone. DJ, I think you were the good luck charm. Thanks for jumping on.
Happy to jump on. I don't think it was me. And now let's all just keep our ears to the ground to see if we hear any trade talk or to see if they settle in at 2 and they get a player they really wanted to. I'll be very intrigued to see if they try to move to 1 or 3.
Thanks, DJ.
See you, bye.
All right, there he is, David James, jumping on as the Utah Jazz have moved up to the number 2 overall pick in the 2026 NBA draft. The Washington Wizards have the number 1 overall pick. Memphis will be drafting 3, and the Chicago Bulls are drafting 4. The losers in this draft, teams that fell, as we mentioned, the Indiana Pacers dropped from 2 to 5. The Brooklyn Nets dropped from 3 to 6. The Sacramento Kings dropped from 7 to 2. By the way, how critical now was the Jazz winning that coin
Flip,
toss
yes.
the Monday after the regular season ended. Had the Jazz lost, they would have dropped to 7 and been looking at one of these guards. Atlanta dropped a spot, and Dallas dropped a spot. Otherwise, the Jazz were lucky to move up. So this gets really interesting, and you heard DJ mention it there. You start getting into trade talks as well with number 2 overall.
Yes.
Because you have a chance to get one of the best players on the planet if you are seriously talking about moving the number 2 overall pick. This isn't the number 2 overall pick in a bad draft. This is the number 2 overall pick in a great, great draft. In fact, this might be the best number 2 overall pick. I'd have to look at draft history of when the last, this highly rated of a number 2 was on the board. It's been a while.
Yes.
If you are talking about this moving this pick, you're talking about the 10 best players in the NBA. And that's where Giannis Antetokounmpo's name comes in. That's where Jaylen Brown's name comes in. Obviously there's a big gap between Giannis and Jaylen Brown, but you can get into those conversations now very seriously. And you may have pursued them at 6 or 7, but the amount you'd have to give up in those talks with a 6th or a 7th pick might have just been too expensive.
Yeah.
Now you could just be looking at number 2 in salary for a team saying, hey, you're never guaranteed a top pick. The Milwaukee Bucks don't control most of their draft picks going forward. Maybe we could move up and get this selection. I'm talking from Milwaukee's perspective here, and just saying, could jump up to number 2, get our guy of the future, maybe get a sign and trade with a Walker Kessler type, and the Jazz bring back the first top 5 player they've had on the team since Karl Malone left the roster in 2003.
Yeah.
That's the serious type of conversation the Jazz could be having. Now, the Washington Wizards can have that as well, but the Jazz are really, really in a good spot. My gut would tell me they make the pick, obviously.
Yes.
I think Occam's razor tells you that's the most likely outcome. But I think they will very seriously kick the tires on everybody around the NBA to see what's out there, because you are very rarely in the catbird seat when it comes to the NBA. Generally, the league does not revolve around you unless you're trading Rudy Gobert or Donovan Mitchell and you're trying to fall to the bottom. Now the Jazz are very seriously looking at climbing to the top, and how quickly they want to open this championship window. Is it someone they want to have for 5, 6, 7 years and bet that they can develop and think that there's a real superstar on their hands, or try and flip it for a superstar themselves?
Yeah, and I think another point that's worth making is there are some prospective NBA draft lottery reforms on the horizon. So the Jazz sort of getting in and getting out at the perfect time, and of course closing off this sort of rebuild era with a number 2 pick. I think it's sort of all of the birds lined up for the Jazz. And
everything lined up.
I think it all came together really well. I think you're going to add this guy, and I think whoever, I would also agree with you that I think picking is the most likely thing to happen here. And I think that this pick, sort of to how Keontae sort of set up the Jazz trade for Jaren Jackson, I think this trade will set up what a competitive Jazz team looks like over the next 5 years.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, you're bringing in a prospect that I think is probably the best the Jazz have ever drafted.
Yeah.
Now you could go back to the Darrell Griffith draft and say, it was a good draft and Darrell was fine. He actually won Rookie of the Year, so he ended up was a very good contributor early on. But this player surpasses. This is a better prospect than Darren Williams. This is a better prospect certainly than Enes Kanter. This is a better prospect than Ace Bailey was last year. Once you get up to number 2, 4, 5, you're probably in that same conversation in all honesty. But number 2, you're talking about elite size, pretty NBA-ready game, and a ton of potential ahead of you. There's not really anything limiting what the Utah Jazz are looking at.
Yeah. Man, absolutely crazy. I still can't believe this. So looking at the top 4 again, and again, I do want to say that it is not written in stone that A.J. DeBonta goes number 1 to the Wizards. I think they have a lot to figure out over there, and I think it could be any of Darren Peterson. I think I would maybe scratch Caleb Wilson out of the number 1 pick contention. I think you're looking at Cam Boozer,
I think so too.
Peterson, or A.J. DeBonta. And I mean, at number 2, even if it is AJ number 1, you're looking at Darren or Cam Boozer. Now, I will say, shout out to DJ. He sort of mentioned talking about maybe starting for this rookie. I think the only chance that happens would be if you're drafting AJ or Darren Peterson. I think Darren Peterson, his fit as sort of an off guard next to Keontae George, and then with the jumbo sort of front court, I think that makes a lot of sense. And then maybe Ace Bailey gets pushed down to the bench. I will say, though, Will Hardy has talked about a meritocracy. So I think starting the season, Ace Bailey will be the starting shooting guard. But with the number 2 pick, best young prospect on the team, would not shock me at all if he eventually earns that spot.
So here's a history of number 2 overall picks beginning with last year, just going back, just to give you a sense of the types of names that have gone number 2 overall, how good they can be, and then, of course, where you run into some issues. But Last year, Dylan Harper was playing a very big role right now in the playoffs for the San Antonio Spurs. I think this number 2 overall pick is a better prospect than Dylan Harper.
Agreed.
Alex Sarr, number 2 overall before that. Again, this prospect is better than Alex Sarr. Year before that, Brandon Miller in 2023. Brandon Miller was very highly sought after.
Yeah,
and went ahead of Scoot Henderson. So I think he was a big time recruit. I still think this player is better than Brandon Miller was. Chet Holmgren at 4 might be the last time there was like a kind of perceived can't miss player. Now, even then, going into that year's draft, we didn't know if Jabari Smith Jr. was going to be the number 1 overall pick, or Paolo, or even Chet. Paolo goes 1, Chet falls to 2. Jalen Green to the Rockets in 2021 did not turn out to be a terrific player. James Wiseman, the biggest bust on this list. Well, the biggest bust on this list. He goes to the Golden State Warriors. Had a very bizarre college career. Yeah. Got paid to go to Memphis and was disqualified basically as a result. Ja Morant in 2019, again, at one point was maybe the most exciting young player in the NBA. Marvin Bagley, huge bust with the Sacramento Kings. Lonzo Ball, this is a run I forgot the Lakers had 3 number 2 overall picks in a row. They went Lonzo Ball, Brandon Ingram, D'Angelo Russell. Before that, Jabari Parker, who was also viewed as a can't-miss player, who did miss. So there's really no such thing as a true can't-miss player. But, those names I mentioned, you're talking about some of the better players in the NBA when they hit their peaks. So it's dicey. It's not a can't-miss spot, but there have been players like Kevin Durant drafted number 2 overall. There have been big-time franchise changers. You would obviously rather have the number 1 overall pick. Second best ain't bad for the Utah Jazz. And
this draft has been sort of compared to 2003 in the sense that you have like this group at the top of the draft that could be all-star to all NBA level. So I think outside the top 4 was obviously the worst case scenario. I think there was even a gap between number 4 and then number 3 and number 2, because at least at number 2 and number 3, you sort of have somewhat of a pick of the group. Of course, at number 1, you get to pick any of the 4. But then at number 2, the Jazz be like, okay, maybe that was the number 1 guy on our big board, but we have absolutely no problem taking the number 2 guy.
All right, we're going to take a break. When we come back, we will talk a little bit more about what this means for the Utah Jazz, what the next month is going to look like for Austin Ainge, Justin Zanuck, Danny Ainge, Ryan Smith, Will Hardy, and how they kind of prepare for making this number 2 overall pick coming up on June 23rd. Actually, the draft is on a Tuesday this year. They've kind of changed some of the dates up, so we will talk about that more on the other side. Stick around. The Utah Jazz move up to the number 2 overall selection in the 2026 NBA Draft. This is your KSL Sports NBA Draft Lottery Show. Your 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone NBA Draft Lottery Show. About half an hour ago, we learned the Utah Jazz moved up to the number 2 overall pick from the number 4 best odds. The first time in franchise history the Jazz have moved up with their own pick. They will be picking number 2 overall. The Washington Wizards drafting number 1. I just put it out on Twitter. If I had to guess right now, and I think that's what people are probably interested in, I think A.J. DeBonce is going to go number 1 overall to the Washington Wizards. I think Cam Boozer goes number 2 overall to the Utah Jazz.
Okay. I can see that absolutely. You have the family tie with Carlos Boozer, who has some sort of role in the front office with the Utah Jazz. I think as a prospect, Boozer is better. I just can't help but look at the potential fit of Darren Peterson. Of course, if the injury and the motor and all of these questions are answered, and they aren't an actual question that needs to be addressed, I just think his fit next to Keontae would just be so perfect, it's almost comical.
Yeah, no, and again, here's the good news. Not a bad selection here.
Yes.
If AJ were to fall in my hypothetical here, you get an huge A-plus scoring wing with top-tier potential, evolving playmaking. Defense wasn't very good at BYU, but I don't judge a lot of these one-and-done guys too much on their defense. I think a lot of them are tasked often with providing as much offense as they can and not getting themselves in foul trouble, especially at the college level. And I think that probably does apply to A.J. DeBonce. Cam Boozer, also a little, not a liability defensively. In some ways he is. His defensive numbers were fabulous analytically, but that Duke team was a very good defensive team and probably covered up some of the things he doesn't do well, which may be exploited more in the NBA. He's a little slow-footed. He's really not a great run and jump athlete. That's kind of not the type of athlete he is. He would enter the NBA, and I'm not kidding, as a top 10 strongest player in the league. Yeah. As a rookie. That is crazy. Really, really unique. He would step in and doesn't quite have the grown man strength, but he will just absolutely dominate you and push you out of the way, and has a chance as you watch Nikola Jokic start to age a little bit. I think there's a world where Cam Boozer's the best offensive player in the NBA. Yeah. I think he might be that special with his ability to pass, and then steps out and shoots 40% from 3 and is an A-plus rebounder and is a great outlet passer. We'll talk more about those players. Let's go out to the zone phone. Welcome in the coach from Scotty and the coach from 10 to 2 right here on 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone. It is Coach Tim LaComb. What's going on, Coach?
What's going on, guys? What a day, huh?
Number 2 overall pick for the Utah Jazz. I know everyone probably had it in the back of their mind that most likely the Jazz are going to slip, but we don't hear their name called at 5, 6, or 7, and things started to look up for the Utah Jazz.
Yeah, it was awesome. I mean, I guess Ryan came on several, shows and talked about how, the Jazz have never moved up. The math has to math, and I would just say that this is a heck of a time for the math to math. I think there are a ton of options, and I mean, I can already see the wheels turning in Danny's brain from across the room. It just gives the Jazz so many options right now, and at a time when they're really trying to just finish this thing off, this rebuild off. So really fortuitous bounce today, and and it's about time.
All right. I laid out my guess for what I think the top 4 is going to look like. What's your guess right now? If you had to think who Washington's going to take at 1 and then sitting on the board at 2 for the Jazz, and then maybe even what happens at 3 and 4?
Well, I mean, the big elephant in the room is Peterson, and I think, if you go back and watch his Kansas YouTube stuff and some of the things he can do, it's no wonder everybody was so high on him. But what a weird year. And so the bottom line is obtain as much intel as you can on that kid and his story and his situation. I know some things have come out about creatine and that sort of thing, but obviously this is a huge pick. And, I think Peterson, if right, could probably be the solution. I mean, it was debatable coming into the season who was one between he and AJ, and I think his season really hurt him this year. He probably would have been better if he just worked out with his guy somewhere for a year off site. But it is what it is. So just like they did with Ace Bailey last year, dig in hardcore to the recon and the intel. And if Peterson, if it all checks out, I think he's to me he's the no-brainer 2 pick. If there are issues and then you start looking around, and for my money in today's NBA, I would look a long time. I know Boozer's such a analytical darling, but I watch the games being played every night, and I think a lot of what Boozer does.
Looks like we lost the coach. We will have to try and get him back on board. Or not. We'll see what happens. But as you heard him there, going back to Darren Peterson, one thing I would say, and I was thinking about this as Coach was talking, was Danny Ainge. Now, look, Austin Ainge is the president of basketball operations for the Utah Jazz. Danny Ainge is not, and obviously Tim knows that as well. But in Danny's history, he really, really, really highly valued recruiting rankings. Yeah. Historically, you look back at guys he's taken. Coach, but we lost you. You were talking about Cam Boozer and watching the games themselves.
Analytics and how everybody's in love with it. And I think, tried and true character, dad lineage, and then certainly a winner, at every level. So I'm not poo-pooing him at all, but I think the way the modern NBA is being played, a positionless game where length, size, that sort of thing is such a premium. I take a long, hard look at Caleb Wilson, and I wouldn't be surprised if the Peterson thing doesn't check out, if he's a real option at 2. And then I think, the rest just follow suit. Peterson, I think, and then Boozer obviously fill in those spots. The interesting thing is it's usually laid out there how those will go. And this year I think it's even AJ to some respect maybe somewhat up for debate. I'm not 100% on that, but I want to kind of see how this settles and what the Wizards start floating out there and that sort of thing. So kind of the way I see it looking right now.
Coach, we appreciate you jumping on. We will listen to you tomorrow, breaking down the number 2 overall pick in the 2026 draft with Scotty G coming up from 10 to 2. Appreciate you jumping on. Have a happy Mother's Day.
Hey, I appreciate it. And what a time to be in sports radio in the market, huh?
You picked a good time. Why didn't you join us earlier?
Well, I mean, we just everything in due time, my guy.
Coach, thanks. We'll talk to you tomorrow.
Boys. Thank you. See ya.
There he is, Coach Tim LaComb, giving us a breakdown on what he saw from the Utah Jazz. All right, we'll take a break. We'll come back and we'll talk more about the players in this draft. I kind of told you my top 4. We'll go through them again a little bit closer. Stick around. Utah Jazz move up to the number 2 overall pick. This is your KSL Sports, 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone, NBA Draft Lottery Show. It's your NBA Draft Lottery Show. Ben Anderson, Chandler Holt, 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone. The Utah Jazz have jumped from the 4th pick all the way up to the number 2 overall pick. Find themselves in a very advantageous spot. The Washington Wizards will be picking number 1 overall. Number 3 overall will be the Memphis Grizzlies. Number 4 will be the Chicago Bulls. But Jazz fans are in a very, very advantageous spot. You are not in a bad place having someone, quote-unquote, fall to you here at number 2. The Jazz are going to have their pick of the litter. And there's going to be a lot of talent on the board. And as we said, I'm not sure there's a real – I don't know if there's – I know there's not a consensus number 1 pick.
Yes.
I think there's a favorite right now. It's probably A.J. DiBonsa. His ability to score, his size, his potential, I think may slightly separate him against some of the other players in this year's draft. But Darren Peterson is maybe the best shooter in the draft. He had one of the best offensive seasons from any true freshman we've ever seen in college basketball history. Had some pretty insane comps going into the college year. And then the cramps and issues he had at Kansas probably took him out of the conversation for the number 1 overall pick, though certainly I think Washington will do their due diligence. And if they feel like he is the number 1 player and whatever happened at Kansas was due to some short-term physical ailments, he could absolutely be the number 1 overall pick. And also don't underrate Cam Boozer, who was the best player in college basketball last year. He's been the best player every step of the way. Throughout his career. He is about 6 months younger than the rest of these guys in this draft. Don't forget he's 18. Some of these other guys are, mid-19 already, will turn 20 during their rookie seasons. That does not apply to Cam Boozer. He's very young, has an NBA body right away. And you look at an NBA that's entirely about size advantage, mismatches, really thinking the game right now, that those are all strengths for Cam Boozer, though he is not an elite athlete. He's not a big-time jumper. He doesn't move laterally all that well. But he does everything else at an A-plus level.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's shout out to Tim Hazard on Twitter. He said something that I think is absolutely accurate. And with you adding that there isn't a guaranteed number 1 overall pick, the Jazz will have all of these guys in for workouts.
Yes.
And I don't be surprised, and I think almost expect that both the draft combine and these individual workouts will absolutely sway who the Jazz are looking at with this number 2 pick.
Yeah. They play a part. I've talked to a lot of people. I've talked to former, Jazz front office people. I've talked to current Jazz front office people. And what you will hear over and over is it's a piece of the puzzle. It's not a whole puzzle. You can't just be swayed by the great dinner you take them to or the workout they come, where none of these guys are playing against each other. They're all coming in and working out against chairs and shooting in the open gym, and the Jazz will run them through some things. But this is not that. Whoever the Jazz draft will not be because somebody came and shot the ball well during a pre-draft workout. Or what will matter is the measurements tomorrow at the NBA Combine.
Yep.
If A.J. DiBonsa has enormous measurements, and maybe is still grown, or his arms are longer than expected, again, I think he will be the number 1 overall pick, but not super confident. We'll have to see what Boozer tests out as. His vertical numbers will be interesting. Well, really interesting, as will his wingspan. And Darren Peterson as well. I think there's a chance Darren Peterson measures in a little bit shorter than people think. All right, let's welcome in the coach's co-host. We just had the coach on. Now it's time for the man, Scotty G. You can catch him live on 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone, from 10 to 2. Scotty, you and I have done a few of these shows together, and it always results in the Jazz falling. For the first time, they jump up to number 2 overall.
So I think we figured out what the difference here is that I kept my mouth shut on the radio during the lottery, and then the Jazz move up. Cooper Flag could have been a member of this team last year had I just stayed away from the radio. But no. Hey, finally, the Jazz move up in a draft that they desperately needed to move up in. And look, all those long nights with both of you there at that arena covering the team and watching a lot of bad basketball over the last 2 years, it starts to pay off, and it pays off in a big way because, look, whether it's AJ, whether it's Darren Peterson, you will have a generational talent. Now, whether they turn into a generational player, that is largely up to them, but from a talent standpoint, I don't think you can go wrong with either one of these guys.
I'm not ruling out Cam Boozer. I think there's going to be a real push from a lot of people to go. He's going to have fans. He's going to have fans who want him number 1 overall. And I don't just mean Jazz fans. I mean, I would expect people in the front office across the league are going to be huge Cam Boozer fans.
Interesting. And deservedly so. I just, you wonder how much of that game translates to the NBA. What's those vertical numbers going to look like when he tests? What's the wingspan? I mean, there's going to be a couple of things I want to take a look at with him because, frankly, if it were me and the Jazz were at number 3, I might take Caleb ahead of Boozer.
Yeah, I think there's a world where that happens still. I think there is a world where Cam falls to Chicago, which ironically is the place where Carlos also played. There's going to be a lot of familiarity. But I will tell you, and don't be surprised when you hear this, Jazz fans, you're going to hear a lot of people saying Cam Boozer's the best player in this draft. That is going to be there's going to be a very, very strong push. And I don't just mean from Cam Boozer's camp, but the people who really highly value analytics, which the Jazz do, maybe not as much as some teams, though. There's going to be a lot of teams that tell you that Cam Boozer's by far the best player in this draft.
He is an analytics darling. The stat nerds are lining up already for Cameron Boozer. There's no doubt.
Ben earlier talked about how the options are all on the table for the Utah Jazz right now. Of course, I think betting odds and just everyone would assume that the Jazz are going to just make the pick, but there is absolutely a world as the Jazz look to be a playoff team next year that they could trade it for a win-now player, maybe just with some extra contracts that they have. What do you think about that scenario?
I certainly everything's on the table. And with Danny Ainge, the one thing we know about Danny Ainge is we have no idea what's going on in the brain of Danny Ainge. And so I think certainly everything's on the table for him. It would have to be a king's ransom for that number 2 pick for the Jazz to move out of that thing. Frankly, I could see a world where the Jazz actually try to move up to number 1 just to ensure that they get the exact player they want. Trading down, I just don't see it. But then again, with Danny Ainge, you never know. You absolutely never know. And it wouldn't also surprise me to see him trade down a little bit in the draft too, as he did in Boston, because was it Tatum that he traded down for?
Yep.
And because he saw something that nobody else really saw, and so he was willing to move back a little bit, and everybody kind of looked at that with a side eye, but he knew he could get him and get some assets out of it as well.
I think the only name, honestly, Scotty, if you're talking about trading the number 2 overall pick in this year's draft, is Giannis Antetokounmpo. I'm serious.
Yes.
I think that's the only name you talk about.
Yep, that's fair. Absolutely.
Looking at the Jazz now for the next month and a half, I mean, rank this as far as, most exciting moments for the Jazz's history. I mean, you've been doing this for 20-plus years here in Salt Lake City. I've been doing it for 15 years. Donovan Mitchell's breakout, that 2-week run where they beat the Oklahoma City Thunder in his rookie season, I think that was pretty magical for Jazz fans. You felt like you had a superstar in the making on your hands. I don't know what else is going to compare to this. This is pretty unique for the Jazz to be in.
And even when they made the Western Conference Finals with Boozer and Darren, it felt a little off just because they played a Golden State team that upset Dallas in the first round. And so it wasn't necessarily the hardest path to get to the Western Conference Final, and then they were dispatched, I believe, in 5 games to San Antonio. So that came to a screeching halt. I wasn't around for the John and Carl years, so I can't obviously judge it against that. I'm sure that's the highlight right there. That's the Mount Rushmore. But honestly, when you look at just overall excitement, when you couple what the Jazz have gone through over the last few years with the Jaren Jackson Jr. trade and now adding the number 2 overall pick, just if it's Darren Peterson, I think people have got to realize that, this is ending in a big way, and the Jazz should be a playoff team next year.
Yeah, you kind of add whiplash to that whole series of events that you just said, because you add in the sort of number 5 pick and then rise of Ace Bailey, and then, of course, the near all-star jump of Keontae George. A really quick turnaround for the rebuilding Jazz.
Well, and the other thing, too, and look, everybody's going to talk about AJ, and for good reason. The dude is special, and he's going to go number 1. So if you're looking at Darren Peterson, there's going to be a lot of research because there's going to be a lot of negative publicity. But the Jazz just took a guy that had negative publicity, and it turned out to be all for naught. Ace Bailey turned out to be a great kid. And so Darren Peterson, there is going to be a lot of conversation about who he is as a person. Obviously, skill set has a chance to be an elite NBA player. But what's up with the cramping thing? He came out and said, I was taking too much creatine, and that's what caused it. But when Bill Self put him through Hell Week, he did not respond well to that at Kansas. And so, obviously, the Jazz are going to do their due diligence. They will leave no stone unturned to figure out what the story is with Darren Peterson. I purposely stuck around in the NCAA tournament to watch him. They were in San Diego in the same venue as Utah State. And I wanted to get my eyes on him. And granted, it's a extremely small sample size of one game watching him live. But I will say, talent-wise, it was very easy to see who the best player from a talent standpoint was on that team, or on that court, period. I mean, he was just, the brilliance that he could show in those flashes was just incredible. And then there were timeouts, and that's what I really wanted to take a look at. Body language wasn't great, not a lot of great interaction with teammates. So there was some stuff there, but also I don't think the teammates did him much of a favor either. I saw some possessions where it looked like they were kind of icing him out a bit. So something wet happened there at Arizona. It just wasn't cramping, at Kansas. Something happened. I don't know what, but I guarantee the Jazz are going to find out what happened.
Yeah, and again, this is unique. The Jazz can get every single one of these players in for a workout. That didn't happen last year.
Yeah.
Cooper Flagg didn't come in and work out in Utah. He had no reason to with the Jazz falling to 5. And as we mentioned, Ace Bailey didn't even come work out in Utah, and the Jazz called his bluff. So I think the Jazz, I look at this roster now, Scotty, and look, they've had teams where they had Stockton and Malone, who were 2 Hall of Famers, and Jeff Hornacek and some good players. They've had teams that had Adrian Dantley and Malone and Stockton and Mark Eaton. Those were great teams. You mentioned Boozer and Darren Williams. You mentioned Rudy Gobert and Donovan Mitchell, 2 Hall of Famers themselves. I think there's a real argument we're about to be watching the most talented team in Utah Jazz history from top to bottom.
Ooh. You know what? I cannot argue with that. From top to bottom, yeah. I mean, you're spot on, because you look at a starting lineup, and just right now, looking at a starting lineup, if Walker Kessler comes back, and I think, Ben, you and I both agree he's going to come back, right?
Oh, with this pick, yeah, he has to come back.
Yeah,
there's no cost too expensive. You've got a super star caliber player coming in at number 2 who's going to be on a rookie contract for the next 5 years. You have to strike right now. You've got real advantages financially.
So I think that let's just say it's a good day for Walker Kessler, because somebody's going to throw out a crazy offer and the Jazz are going to match. So you got Walker Kessler, you got Larry Markkinen, you got Ace Bailey, you got Keontae George. I'm missing somebody in there. And then
Jaren Jackson Jr.
Oh, Jaren Jackson Jr.
might be the best player on the team.
Yeah, my bad. Oops. And then Darren Peterson you throw in there with a number of young guys that are starting to figure out things. Talent-wise, it's through the roof with this squad. I don't think this is, honestly, on paper, this is not a play-in team. This is a flat-out playoff team.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's got to be the goal. I don't think you're looking at 7 or 8, and you're going to hear the Jazz come out and try and tamper expectations.
Oh, yeah.
Say, we've got to learn how to win, and that matters. And it does, don't get me wrong, but there's a lot of wins out there on the table for you to go out and take. And, the Jazz had to work really hard the last 2 years to only combine to win, 39 wins. I mean, they're going to more than eclipse those 39 wins over the last 2 seasons this year alone.
Yeah.
Speaking of those playoff expectations, Scotty, adding a number 2 overall pick and all the talent that you just listed out, what would you think would be the ceiling for this Jazz team next year?
Next year, the ceiling, I would say, you got to go through and say who are you going to say is going to drop off or who the Jazz could leapfrog. But honestly, I wouldn't put out of the realm of possibility to see the Jazz starting a playoff series with home court advantage with the talent level that they have on this team. You're going to need some help from some other teams. Some other teams are going to need to drop off a little bit. But I honestly, as Ben mentioned, the talent, and now you tell Will Hardy, ready, go, just go, which he's been chomping at the bit to do forever since the first 3 months of his first year as a head coach of the Utah Jazz. So I think that it's ready, set, go, and it wouldn't surprise me if they're a top 4 seed.
Scotty, he's going to be back tomorrow right here on 97.5 and 1280, the KSL Sports Zone, beginning at 10 a.m. with the coach. He'll have a full breakdown on his expectations for the Utah Jazz after moving up to the number 2 overall pick in the 2026 NBA Draft. Scotty, we appreciate you jumping on. We'll talk to you tomorrow.
Good day for the Jazz. Let's go. This is going to be a fun summer.
There he is, Scott Garrard, giving us a breakdown on the Utah Jazz. He was talking about the most exciting times in Jazz history. Certainly the best June in Jazz history since 1998, the last time they were in the NBA Finals.
Yeah,
that's 30 years. That's what we're talking about now. The Jazz are gearing up for what's going to be a very fun time if you're a Jazz fan. This is number 1 pick would have been, I guess, a little bit more exciting, but this is not a year where you feel snake bitten by having the number 2 overall pick, and especially when the Jazz have had such little luck in the draft historically. This is just a major, major positive for the franchise and opens up possibilities that I don't think have seriously been there since those late 90s runs. I mean, I think the Jazz, if they hit on this player with the quality of this draft, you're talking about a team that could potentially climb back to the top of the Western Conference Finals, and not the way Donovan Mitchell and Rudy Gobert did it, but I mean has a real chance to make noise in the playoffs.
And what I'm seeing on Twitter or X from Jazz fans, I got a reply that said basically what you just said. I'd only be 2% happier if we got the number 1 pick. After a long history, especially the last 4 years of staying put or falling in the draft lottery, the Jazz finally break through and rise up. And I think that Jazz fans are elated right now. Absolutely.
All right, we'll take a break. We'll come back. We'll close the show. Stick around. More NBA Draft Lottery coverage, 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone. It's your KSL Sports NBA Draft Lottery show. Ben Anderson, Chandler Holt, the Utah Jazz climb from number 4 all the way up to the number 2 overall pick. If you were to look at the odds before the draft, the Jazz had a, about a 10.5% chance of climbing up to number 2? 11.4.
Yes.
11.4% chance of jumping up to the number 2 overall pick. And obviously, in that sense, really defied the odds.
Yeah.
1 in 10 chance to move up, and they did. They will be drafting number 2 overall. Washington Wizards at 1. Memphis Grizzlies at 3. They had a 9.4% chance of drafting 3rd overall. And then the Chicago Bulls jump up to number 4. Indiana Pacers, the big losers tonight, they drop to number 5, which means their pick goes to the Los Angeles Clippers, which is probably not great for the Utah Jazz. But honestly, you're not worried about anyone behind you now. And the nice thing is the number 1 overall pick is going to the Eastern Conference. So Jazz, the top drafting team in the West, and the options are going to be all over the board. Let's quickly run through these players for those still listening, just to kind of give Jazz fans an idea of who they might be if they are the number 1 overall pick. So comps are always lousy just because there's no one-to-one player in the NBA. I've never gone back and looked at a comp and been like, wow, that turned out to be exactly right. Like, good players produce in ways that are completely unique to themselves. Very rarely are players very similar in the NBA. But as good shorthand of like what type of player they might turn out to be, where do you think, or who do you think someone like A.J. DeBonsa might turn into?
I think with A.J. DeBonsa, you're looking at, and this is the one that's thrown around a lot for him, sort of like a Tracy McGrady. Mm-hmm. And I think also like current day, like a Jaylen Brown is also sort of an active thing. He's, of course, bigger, I think, plays bigger, and also works out of the post more than Jaylen Brown, and probably even T-Mac did. But I think that's sort of what you're looking like. And also, of course, has defensive upside.
Yeah, you're talking about a leading scorer on a team, ball-in-hand wing that kind of develop into a playmaker and a better defensive player. It's not what he does great right now, and the shooting's got to come around. But it seems like every indicator is, he's a great kid, and he has a good chance of reaching his potential.
Yes.
I'll go with Darren Peterson next. I know that's who a lot of Jazz fans seem to be interested in at number 2 overall. It seemed to be who Scotty seemed to believe the Jazz were going to take at number 2 overall. And look, you heard Kobe Bryant, Michael Jordan, even at times, which is insanely reckless.
Yes.
Michael Jordan's the greatest player of all time. I would tell you, I think there's a real pathway for him to have a career that resembles Ray Allen. Mm-hmm. Ray Allen, you remember, coming out of college, was not just a great shooter, but one of the best athletes. He was actually in the dunk contest. And Darren Peterson, I think, maybe isn't quite that explosive of a leaper. Now, some of that may have been due to his injuries and full body cramping at Kansas, but is a big-time athlete himself. Not the best in the draft, but a good leaper. Incredible body control. More fluid, I guess, than explosive, and an elite shooter.
Yeah.
And so the worst case scenario, I think, as he evolves, is you've got like a true 3-and-D 2 guard who might be able to moonlight at the 1. Certainly going to be like a secondary creator and playmaker, but you probably do want to have a point guard next to him.
Arguably the second best defender and best perimeter defender in the top 4 now.
Yes, I think so. He's going to be a very solid defensive player, if not a plus defensive player. Again, as long as the health checks out.
Yeah.
And I'll be curious to decide. The weird thing about Darren is you don't see a lot of true 2 guards in the NBA anymore. It's just like kind of a dead position.
Yeah.
There aren't a lot of guys like Ray Allen in today's NBA. All right, number 3 will be Cam Boozer, and who do you see?
Cam Boozer is a tough player.
He's very tough
to come up with a comp for. But I do think, like, my mind immediately just goes to like a Nikola Jokic light, like a smaller version of Jokic, because he really is, or projects to be, that sort of offensive hub type of big man. I think you can run him in all kinds of actions. I think he did score like 150 of his points at Duke coming out of the post, but he scored in so many other ways that if you take the post scoring out of his game, which isn't as prevalent at the NBA level, then he'll still be just fine. So I think one of those sort of offensive hub type of big men would be the best comp for him.
Yeah, and the names there are Kevin Love in his prime. You mentioned Nikola Jokic, Alperen Şengün, Domantas Sabonis, Julius Randle, like guys who have been all NBA players, very highly skilled players who, yes, you dump the ball into and you allow them to make decisions. I would just tell you that outside of Jokic, Cam Boozer is by far the best processor of that group.
Yeah.
He's much better passer than Sabonis and Alperen Şengün. He's a, more talented shooter than all of those guys as well. So that's kind of the sell on him. He shot 39% from three in his lone season at Duke and averaged 22 and 10, was the College Player of the Year, won every award. And then number 4, Caleb Wilson is the rawest of this group, the 6'9", 6'10 freshman out of North Carolina. I'll be curious to see his measurements coming out of the combine this week. I would tell you I don't think there's like a great chance he's the number 2 overall pick to the Utah Jazz.
Agreed.
He's certainly the least likely of this group, though I wouldn't rule it out. If the Jazz fall in love with him and maybe he shoots really well during this preseason or this pre-draft process, he could certainly climb up and leap some people. Also a little bit of a tough comp. Super athletic 4 who probably could moonlight a little bit at 3, might even be able to play a little bit of the 5.
Something that a comp that I recently saw for him was Toronto Raptors Chris Bosh.
Okay, interesting.
And I like that because that was like if you think about Chris Bosh's career, he sort of turned the 3-point shooting corner in Miami, and of course he kind of had to playing alongside Dwayne Wade and LeBron James. But before that, he was sort of a face-up. He was more athletic than I think he gets credit for back when he was in Toronto, and sort of just like an inside-out type of guy. I could see that.
The value for all of these players and why it matters the Utah Jazz are at number 2 is there is a very real argument that any one of these 4 could end up being the best player in the draft.
Yeah.
And look, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander was the best player at his draft and was drafted behind Colin Sexton. That could really happen anywhere. Nikola Jokic is the best player in the NBA, or was, and was a second-round draft pick. Giannis was for a while and was, selected in the teens of a very bad draft. So you can pick a great player anywhere, but certainly if you had to pick out of this class who was going to be the best player, you would take one of these top 4 guys.
Yes.
And these top 4 guys are all really good. Being the best player from this class is really going to mean something.
Yeah.
You go back and you look at some of the great drafts historically. We go back to Andrew Wiggins and Jabari Parker and Aaron Gordon and Joel Embiid. Well, not all of those guys hit their top 1 out of 1 outcome. Joel did, and he became an MVP.
Yes.
So that's kind of how you look at these picks is, well, maybe not all of these guys turn into their superstar versions of themselves. If you get the best player out of this draft, I think that guy does become like a top 10 player in the NBA.
Yeah.
And that's where the Jazz have an opportunity to draft somebody now that the Jazz don't get a lot of opportunities to add top 10 players in the league to their roster.
Real quick, I want to say, first thoughts from us, I think you like Cam Boozer at 2, and I'm leaning towards Darren Peterson a little bit at 2. Let's be thankful we're talking about Cam Boozer and Darren Peterson instead of Darius Acuff and Michael Brown Jr.
Yes, these are far less flawed players than
Yes.
we'd be talking about the smaller guys who are going 5 and later. So the Utah Jazz, Austin Ainge, Justin Zanuck, Danny Ainge, Ryan Smith, Will Hardy, and then everyone on the roster has to be just absolutely thrilled about what happened today. And, Jazz fans most of all, and I do mean this, Jazz fans have been really loyal for 4 years, sticking with this team through this really difficult rebuild, all the tanking, and I think there was a light at the end of the tunnel. There was a present under the tree on Christmas morning. We just don't know who it's going to be, but we will have full coverage of the NBA draft beginning tomorrow right here on 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone with DJ and PK at 6 o'clock, and that will run up through draft day, I believe Tuesday, June 23rd, to see if we can get one of us to New York. It'd probably pretty crucial for this year's draft. We'll see what that ends up looking like, but find all the coverage you need at KSLSports.com and 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone. Big thanks to Christian, Lloyd, everybody who helped us organize this show today, and we'll be back with you again tomorrow.